Welcome back to another episode of the Crimson Crossover Podcast. I'm Christian Sykes, joined by Joey Blackwell and Charles Branch, as always. Today we have a special guest, Blake Lovell of Southeastern. Is it 14 Southeastern or Southeastern 14? I can never remember.
Southeastern 14. It's 14 Southeastern on Twitter because we
Yeah,
were geniuses, right? And decided to flip it because that won't confuse anyone. But it was like the other one wasn't available. We were not very creative at the time. So we're just like, let's just go with this and who cares? So yeah, Southeastern 14 it is for now, of course.
Yeah,
for
you got to
now.
read it for a few months.
We've got that coming in the probably right after the tournament ends. So that's the plan. So yeah.
It's going to be the Blake Lovell show, is what I've been told per sources.
You don't want that because yeah, that's probably not the best idea. So we'll keep it as because otherwise it'd just be an Auburn show, right? So
That's what I was going to say. You should feel honored. This is the first Auburn fan we've had on the podcast ever. So
you do realize what you're spreading here, and that's why like the vitriol I get from Alabama fans is only intensified since you've started spreading this year after year after year. So I blame you for all this.
Well, so the issue with that is that you stopped our EF Watson dynasty on what was it, college hoops, like 2K6 or something like that,
K8.
2K8, and you stopped that, and so I never got to see the career of EF Watson. So I have to spread that it's only because you hate the Tide, unfortunately.
It was a good thing we had going that season. We beat Bucky McMillan and Sanford. We beat Duke. I don't remember who we lost to, but we were really on a roll. And yeah, we didn't finish the season. We had a great recruiting class. And so we'll bring it back at some point. I mean, look, we got college football coming back. We'll have to do some basketball. Max and I have already talked about that. So he could make his return. You may get to see how his career played out sooner rather than later.
I'm pretty sure he was the highest rated recruit in Alabama history. I'm pretty sure that, or
I think we out recruited Nate Oates. I'm pretty sure.
yeah.
Like he was a stud. So,
Well, we have you on today to talk about obviously the NCAA tournament, Alabama's bracket, and then maybe some other SEC things as far as your favorite team, Auburn, and your second favorite team. I think Vanderbilt is your second favorite team. So,
goodness gracious, oh my, wow.
But let's start with Alabama's draw. Alabama gets the 4 seed in the West region, playing in Spokane against Charleston, College of Charleston, and their second round potential matchup, if they beat College of Charleston, is either St. Mary's or Grand Canyon University. They're in the same bracket as Mississippi State, Michigan State, and Chapel Hill, University of North Carolina. I apologize. That's my Carolina-ness coming out. I call them Chapel Hill. But what do you think about the draw that Alabama got in this NCAA tournament bracket?
I mean, I think the West. We were talking about this as the show was going on. I mean, to me, there are quite a few teams that if you told me and I hadn't watched the entire tournament and you said, all right, here's the Final Four and here's who's representing the West, you could probably tell me, I don't know, 7 teams. And I'd be like, okay, I could have found you a scenario where one of those 7 could have advanced to the Final Four. And obviously Alabama would be one of those teams. And I think it's the nature of you've got the bracket where you have the lowest ranked number 1 seed. And I feel like we always kind of can do that every year where we're like, okay, well, this is not the strongest of the ones. This is the one that was rated the lowest. So let's look at different options. And then, Arizona, obviously they're good, but they're vulnerable, right? Like, of course, Alabama saw them earlier in the year. Baylor, this isn't the Baylor team that did what they did several years ago. It's completely different. I mean, you've got Alabama, you've got St. Mary's, you've got, there's even teams like, right, New Mexico's been hot. I'm not saying they're going to get to the Final Four, but they're an interesting team in this part of the region. As is, the 12 and 13s, right? Grand Canyon and Charleston. Those are interesting teams. I'm not saying those would be in the Final Four if we had to pick 7, but they're at least teams that fit some of the profile of teams that can make a run in the tournament. You got the 8-9, Mississippi State, Michigan State. Who knows? Like Mississippi State, they get their bully ball going. They may be able to win a couple games here. So I think there's lots of chaos potential in the West. And, obviously it starts for Alabama with Charleston, which I know we'll get into. Contrary to popular belief, I don't think Alabama is going to lose. I just think it's a team that is interesting stylistically, and all those things that I'm sure we'll talk about. But yeah, I don't think this is the worst draw at all for Alabama because they didn't find themselves stuck in a bracket where if they get to the Sweet 16, they have to play the toughest one seed or the second toughest. I mean, I think UNC is clearly the worst of the one seeds, and so that's a good spot to be in.
Yeah, and we're talking about the NCAA bracket, and I think in your chaos bracket you had Alabama losing in the first round. Um,
Did I?
I think so. Maybe you had them in the second round against Grand
Maybe
Canyon
it's
losing.
I don't remember. Who
Um,
knows? I mean, let's be
I'm
honest.
surprised you didn't
Who
put
knows?
Auburn, Alabama as a Final Four matchup because I was doing some stuff and I was like, that's a chaos bracket if I've ever seen one.
You
Um,
know, I had them in the SEC tournament, and it did not deliver. I had Auburn, Alabama, as you know, in the Chaos Bracket Championship in the SEC tournament, and it did not deliver. So I'm sorry, Alabama. I had to knock you for that one.
what do you see from this Alabama team that one can give you hope that they can make a run, and then two on the flip side that they might be able to leave or exit the tournament earlier than maybe what people are expecting?
Okay, so I'll get the negative out of the way early. All right. And it's not negatives, it's just simply stats, right? And stats are always made to not tell the full story. And I don't know how many times I had to copy and paste that in the replies today on Twitter. The stats never tell the full story. But if you look at certain things, there are things that you will look at in this and say, okay, Charleston is the team that is 3-point happy, right? Like they want to shoot a lot of threes and they make threes. They're a really good shooting team. And so, okay, that's something we look at. Alabama's weakness is defense. I mean, I don't know if that would ever change. We're however many 30 something games in the season. They've been what they've been. I know a lot of people are like, well, they've got to fix this. They're not going to fix it now. Like they're not going to completely fix their defense now. You're too many games in the season, right? And so that has got to be something that's at least noteworthy, right? And of course, yes, I pulled up the stats going back to February 21st. Why do we pick February 21st? Well, it's basically a month, okay? It's a month sample size, and I'd rather pull up February 21st than I would November 21st because the tournament wasn't played in November. It's played now, and I think when you look at the trends for Alabama, defensively the numbers are not good, of course. We know that, right? But what's also interesting, I think, is that Alabama has only shot, 28.9% from three over the past month, basically, 309th nationally. Now, they played solid teams, but I would like to also mention in there, they played defensive teams like Florida and Kentucky, which, you know, are not the best defensive teams in the SEC, right? So those are just a couple things that you look at here. And Charleston, with the way they can score the ball, the way they can shoot it, top 10 nationally in 3-point percentage over the past month, basically. Those are things I think you have to look at and say, all right, it's a high scoring game. Both these teams are going to score. Both these teams, at times, defense is optional. So three balls going up everywhere, lots of volatility, right? This is one of those games where I think the unpredictability, because of how the two teams play, I don't know how anyone could just be completely certain that one outcome is going to favor the other. And so I think as a 4-13, that's usually not what I want to see, right? I want to see something where I'm like, okay, the four clearly has an advantage. They're going to easily win by 15. Let's not talk too much about it. But I think this is one you have to kind of put some attention into. 27 of 38, 13 seeds have won, and the 38 NCAA tournaments have been played. So that's a number you have to look at. But there's one thing that Nate Oates said. You guys know this. They're finally going to be what on Friday? They're finally going to have everyone. And I think that is where 3-point numbers. Alabama's not going to shoot this poorly. And this is the number I was almost expecting people to kind of lean on. They've shot 28.9% over the past month. There's no way a team that shoots this well is going to keep that going, right? They're going to turn that around. They're not a 28.9%. They're not Texas A&M. I mean, my goodness, they're not just chucking up threes and hoping for the best. So that's going to change. And at some point, it's probably going to change against a team that is also not great defensively, and that is Charleston. And so you've got Reitzel back. You've got your full lineup now. And I think that's where they will improve the 3-point shooting. They're going to make more threes than they have over the past little bit just because of that. Defensively, they are going to have the profile of a team that if you're going to slow down to Charleston, Alabama is, like you mentioned, you guys were talking about before. It's like, okay, Nelson, he's going to be able to have an advantage defensively. How many games could we say that in the SEC? There weren't a lot. right? And so there are both ways you can play this, but I think it's still something to where I can't say I completely love the matchup for Alabama, but I've also, this, Christian, what I've said all season, and this is why when Alabama was 6-5, everybody thought I was nuts because we made our bold predictions, and I said I know they're 6-5. I said I'm picking Alabama to win the SEC because they are just going to go out and outscore everybody. I said SEC teams put up great offensive numbers in non-conference play, and then what happens? You get them to they start going backwards a little bit because they're not playing teams that are ranked 300th in Ken Palm and all this anymore. They're playing teams that are physical defensively and all of that. And so I think the way this sets up, like Alabama could win this thing by 30 because they could just outscore Charleston. If both teams are playing their best, Alabama wins by 10 plus. But because you have a team that I don't think you can completely put away if they're also hitting shots and Alabama gives them open shots, it's at least something I think you can't just completely ignore.
So what about the positives? What do you think? Do you think that Alabama? I know you said that the shooting can't kind of stay at that 28%. Um, do you think that Alabama? My prediction, at least as of right now in my bracket, is I have Alabama in the Sweet 16. Do you think that Alabama is a team that can make a run? There's never been a team in I guess Kim Pom statistical history that has been top 10 in top 10 in offense and below 100 in defense that has won a game in the NCAA tournament. Do you think that Alabama can change that? And do you think that they can turn this around enough to where maybe they get a Sweet 16 appearance, or maybe they finally break the curse and get to the Elite Eight or further?
Yeah, because I think it's the same thought process. I think it is, if you assume that Alabama is not going to get bogged down by a team like Tennessee. This isn't Tennessee. They're not playing the Vols. Thank God they're not playing the Vols, right? They're not playing a team that's just going to body them, be physical, all these other things, and really force them to not run their offense the way they want to run their offense. Charleston will give them the opportunities to make shots. But again, like I said, it could be the same on the flip side. But the thing is, with Alabama, here's what I like. And this is something I always look at, not just filling out a bracket, but this time of year, the teams I like the most are the teams that, if you go back throughout the entire season, and again, maybe I'm wrong for this, but I don't put as much stock in what a team did in November and December anymore. I know those games were played, but teams changed so much from November 6th to now. And so we have to look at it, but I also want to see what a team has done beyond that point, right? Like start to get in your conference play, break some different things down. But overall, no matter what, we can't go back to November 6th for this. Alabama has not lost a game this season against what I would classify as a bad team, right? I just don't see it. And so if you're able to avoid those losses, that tells me that when you play teams you're supposed to beat, you beat them. Alabama's pretty much done that all season, right? I mean, so if they've done that against the type of competition they play, one of the strongest schedules in the country, as we know, then I tend to put my trust in Nate Oates, the team, whatever, in finding a way to win a game like this. Even if there are people, and look, this is one of those two, right? Like, again, the reason I put this out this morning looking at these different stats is because that line starts to move. It starts at 10 or 10.5, whatever it was. And now it's down, it gets to 9. It's back up to 9.5 now. But when you start to see that, you're like, okay, people are seeing different things. But like, and I'm gonna be honest with you, when I saw it go to 9, I said, oh, there's value there. I've got my Alabama -9. I feel really good about it. Because I'm like, if Alabama shoots the ball well, they're going to be fine. So it's all those things. And I think you have a player like Mark Sears who has done this before. You've got someone who just that experience. What do we say every year, right? It's like the teams that are experienced, the teams that can figure it out, and you've seen them figure it out in these kind of settings throughout the season. It's okay, right? We can't just lean on them losing to Florida. That was a bad matchup. I mean, I don't know how many people, myself included, said I would, if there's two teams you want to keep far away from Alabama in the bracket, because you're not going to be away from Kentucky. That's just, it's a given. But Florida and Tennessee, like nowhere near them in the SEC tournament. Of course, they get Florida. And it just thought it was a bad matchup. This one's not a bad matchup. It's also just a matter, though, of looking at the other team and at least saying, okay, we see a team here that is competent enough to make it interesting. But like I said earlier, if Alabama plays their best basketball, I don't think they're going to shoot as poorly. I think you're going to see them at full strength. And remember, we have not seen that in a while. Alabama at full strength was good enough to win the SEC. They just happened to have Miss Wrightsell for however many games, came at a bad time, played some tough games against teams that just went off, Kentucky, Florida, whoever. This is not that. And I think that's at least kind of a sigh of relief, right? Because we always say that too about SEC teams, not just Alabama. You finally get out of that grind of SEC play. It can be a good experience because you're just playing a team that's so much different than what you're used to, and it's probably not going to be as physical as you're used to seeing in the SEC, and that will help too.
And then switching gears just a little bit, the obviously Mississippi State's in Alabama's bracket. You have Tennessee that ended up a 2 seed. Auburn, surprisingly, in my opinion, ended up a 4 seed. With I kind of have I went on Hoop Southbound podcast last night, and I said Auburn got screwed with their bracket placement. Take us into maybe a few other SEC teams, and maybe the outcomes that you potentially could see there. I personally, my initial gut bracket, like you guys did yesterday, which was wild to watch, by the way. It looked painful going through it. My initial gut bracket was Alabama was going to face Mississippi State in the Sweet 16. So let's hear your thoughts on a few other SEC teams that are in the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, I'll get Auburn out of the way quickly because I know your fan base is not tuning in to hear me talk about Auburn. But I think if you look at the numbers, people are like, well, Auburn got screwed and all this other stuff. I mean, I think the bigger things like UConn got screwed. Like they, having the potential to have to go through the teams they're going to have to go through to get to, the Final Four. They're good enough to do it, but it's a tough draw. No matter how you want to slice it, no matter how you look at the numbers, like this was a very tough region for the number one overall seed. And I think so. Yeah, Auburn's path is not going to be easy. I mean, Yale, like we've seen what an Ivy League team can do to an SEC team. We saw it last year. The type of style Yale's going to play like an Ivy League type team. So I think that's one that, and I'm not just saying this because I'm on your show, but I do think that's one that people maybe are overlooking a little bit as the other, 4-13 possibility. Because if we just say, all right, one of these fours is going to lose, then, these are two that are possibilities based on, the games we're talking about here. So, yeah, but, San Diego State's not San Diego State of last year. That's kind of, so that's an interesting part of the bracket, but it's still going to be challenging, I think, for Auburn to make a run no matter what. Toughest path to the Final Four of all the SEC teams in that kind of seed range. Yes, I would think that's probably a given. Mississippi State's an interesting one, like you said. I mean, we've kind of changed our tune a little bit on Mississippi State, and maybe that's just a recency bias, just going way too in on what they did in the SEC tournament. But I tend to think this is not the worst matchup for them because we talked about it a second ago. Whereas, Alabama's going to get maybe a little bit of a reprieve in terms of physicality. North Carolina, Michigan State, I know those are physical leagues, Big Ten more so than the ACC maybe, but you just don't see many teams like Mississippi State and the way they play. And I think the difference this year has been Josh Hubbard. They actually have shooting on the outside, and that's something they did not have last year. So in the right circumstance, I could see Mississippi State advancing to the Sweet 16 because I think they're a tough matchup for a lot of different teams. And to me, these are the kind of teams that could struggle against Mississippi State if Josh Hubbard's making shots, because if not, it puts a lot on the front court with Tolu and those guys. So, yeah, I don't think that's the worst thought in the world that Mississippi State and Alabama could meet in the Sweet 16, which would be great for Alabama, in my opinion, because I just think they match up well with Mississippi State, which we've seen before. A&M, who knows, man? Maybe I value shooting too much, but like, I still don't trust A&M. I know they made a run in the SEC tournament, but I just cannot trust a team that shoots the ball as poorly as they do overall. And, luckily they throw it off the backboard and get the offensive rebound half the time. But I don't know. Nebraska's playing well. Houston rematch that A&M can have. They only lost by 4 without Tyrese Radford previously earlier in the season. But I just think A&M has been too inconsistent for me to completely trust. But it could happen, right? Kentucky, Oakland. I mean, I think Kentucky may have the best path to the Final Four of anybody. And I say that knowing that they got beat by A&M in the first round of the SEC tournament, but also know that Cal is just of the belief that the SEC tournament is not the end-all be-all. And it's hard to trust Kentucky under Cal in the NCAA tournament because they just have not won enough games. But I don't hate their draw at all. Like, I think Oakland may be the most challenging part of that bracket for them. If they can get past the first one, I like the matchup against either Texas Tech or NC State. I can't say I completely trust Marquette as the number 2 seed. So I think Kentucky can make a run. I even think Florida, in the right circumstance, could beat Marquette in the second round. And you could get a Kentucky-Florida matchup in the Sweet 16. Wouldn't be shocked at that. And then who am I forgetting? South Carolina. I do not love the draw for South Carolina. Getting Creighton in the second round, I just don't like it. I think that was a bad draw for the Gamecocks. Tennessee, kind of similar in that I'll be honest, every bracket I filled out so far, we've had our fun with different, kinds of brackets. I've had Creighton coming out over Tennessee. Like, I Tennessee gave me that reason not to trust them. And I was like, all year, we really haven't had that, but now they've given me a reason not to trust them. And that's worrisome, I think, for the Vols. So,
Joey, Charles, you guys got any questions?
So,
Charles.
yeah, I'll go ahead. So this year, NCAA Tournament NIT, last year, NCAA Tournament NIT. Every current SEC program has made the postseason except for Ole Miss, who declined an invitation to the NIT this year. Texas is in the NCAA Tournament. Oklahoma, I believe, was in the NIT last year and declined an invitation this year. As we start looking into next year with the conference changing, how good is this conference going to be in basketball?
yeah, it's going to be ridiculous. Like, because I think, like we said, this was the best the SEC has been in terms of the top half of the conference in a good while. Because I mean, A&M is the 7. There are people picking A&M right to win the league this year. Whether that, again, things have to break your way any year to do that, but the top half was tremendous, and you don't expect much of a fall off. I know people wonder if South Carolina is going to be kind of a one-hit wonder. I'm not convinced of that. I think that he's figured out a style that works for him, and I think they'll recruit to that every year, and just a matter of finding the guys. So that's where things get interesting for the teams, that finished even near the bottom this year, right? Like, Georgia's made strides from 6-26, but are they going to be able to take that next step? Obviously, Missouri, we all know. Yes, I was the Dennis Gates hype man last year. They went 0-18 this year. The truth is probably somewhere, in the middle. I don't think they're an 0-18 team every year, but that shows you that the margin for error, now that you are going to have Texas coming in, you're going to have Oklahoma coming in. Oklahoma, of course, first team left out this year of the NCAA tournament, so they're right there. Yeah, like, Chris Beard, it's a challenge. Like, everybody, hey, Chris Beard's going to win, and he did win right away, 20 wins, but it's going to be hard to kind of stay in that upper echelon every single year in the SEC now, because, I just think that's kind of what you're going to run into, having these two programs in there. And it just raises the stakes for all these teams that are trying to invest all this money into basketball now and, get all the top transfers and recruit well. It's only going to get tougher, because it's like, here's the thing. As long as Nate Oates is at Alabama, as long as Bruce Pearl's at Auburn, as long as Rick Barnes is at Tennessee, people make the jokes all they want about March and all this, but they win games. As long as Cal's there. I know, again, we can have our fun with what they do in the NCAA tournament, but they're going to win games in the regular season. I think Todd Golden is going to have Florida winning games regularly. Same with Buzz. And, like, you keep going down the line, somebody's got to finish somewhere, right? How do you break into that upper echelon and stay there year after year after year? Like, Nate Oates has figured out a way to do it. Auburn had a down year in there. Tennessee probably not going anywhere. Like, there's not going to be much movement just in terms of maybe who finishes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever. Those teams may switch spots, but your chance to keep in that. I mean, look what happened in Arkansas, right? I'm not saying that that's the norm, but, like, every year that's going to be who's that going to be? Like, could that be whoever next year, right? That becomes the next Arkansas. That all of a sudden, just, wow, where did that come from? That's just the room for error and how small it is now in this league. And so it's only going to be, again, even stronger, I think, once you add these two teams to the mix. So,
As Alabama fans, with Nate Oates coming in, we've seen some really tough non-conference schedules. You look at the 3-game stretch we had this year with Purdue, Creighton, Arizona, and there was a lot of talk this year about the Big 12 and how they kind of gamed the net by maybe playing some weaker out of conference opponents. And maybe at the end of the day, that hurt Oklahoma with them not getting in. But I feel like part of the SEC brand has been built that they scheduled a lot better in the past several years since Mike's Live talked about making the investment with facilities, with coaches. Do you see teams still scheduling that tough competition in the non-conference, knowing that the gauntlet they will have in conference, or do you think there'll be a change in that as people start figuring out the SEC in the future?
I think it stays the same because I think, like you just said, I think teams have figured out that if you don't keep it that way, that you're at least leaving that opportunity to all of a sudden, okay, well maybe they value this thing this year and they don't value this thing the next year, and because I think that's something too. Like we know what the committee says, and you can certainly read into different stuff and say, all right, clearly they valued this more this year than they did that, but I don't think there's ever going to be a time where they're going to look up and say, "Oh, that team played the toughest schedule in the country. Let's knock them a line." Right? It's never going to happen. And so I think if you're an SEC team, you basically should do what like you said. I mean, Nate Oates, I think, has done it better than anybody. I mean, Alabama has probably done it as better even when Avery was there. They were scheduling tough towards the end there, and I don't remember exactly early years and all that, but they've scheduled tougher, I would say, than anybody over the past. You guys probably have the number of years better than I do, but I just don't think you should change it. I think you should keep doing it, even knowing that you are going to have those teams coming in. I think the best opportunity you're going to give yourself is to play as many tough games as you can out of conference. I hate to say that because I know what it means. It means that the Belmonts of the world, teams like that are not going to get the number of games maybe that they need to be in that conversation. And I'm just mentioning Belmont because, I've always kind of looked at them as the model, like when Rick Byrd was there, and then of course Casey Alexander, took over and all that. Like they're probably one of many teams that has always been in that range where they just cannot get enough games because people don't want to play them. It's like, what's the value? And I know Alabama, teams like that have played them, but you're just not getting that regularly. And so I would continue to schedule tough because I think that you can do things with the. Don't get me started on the net. It's just it is what it is. It's not the best thing in the world. I know why they do it. I know why it's there. I know what purpose it serves. But I will always kind of side with the coaches who think, all right, no matter what we do, if we lose 13 games and we have the toughest schedule in the country, it's still going to pay off for us. And I think that's the way to go because, think about it too. A&M, they completely changed their approach this year to where think about that schedule they played last year. And, they lost games last year to teams that they should not have been losing to, but their schedule was not tough enough last year. And I think now you look at it, okay, maybe A&M is going to be an interesting team in this tournament. We talked about it. Like, I don't love their draw, but they've played such a tougher schedule this year, even with the ups and downs, that you could see it because you feel like they're tested more than they were last year. And so I think you're going to see every SEC team stay the same with that because I just gone are the days where beating up on 250 through 350 do a whole lot for you. And we've just seen that too many times for teams. Who is it? I'm not saying South Carolina completely scheduled like that, but I do remember the one year where South Carolina won like 11 league games or 12 or something. They weren't even close to the tournament, I think. And so it's like, because they didn't do enough in the non-conference. So schedule tough, worry about everything else later.
So with the expansion, it comes the end of Wednesday night sadness, and it just becomes full day Wednesday sadness, I guess, for those 9 through 16 seeded teams. We just saw what NC State did, winning 5 games in 5 days. My question is, what happens first? Does an SEC team win 5 games in 5 days to win an SEC tournament, or do we have expansion again within the conference before that happens?
That's a good question. I think I would say the 5 and 5 because I think because they're so, because you are going to have 16 teams. And so it's like we said, there could be years where you have a team that because someone has to finish 1 through 16, all of a sudden they're down there playing in that range and like, oh, man, that's, if Texas and Oklahoma weren't here, maybe that's the 8th best team in the SEC or something. Like, you're seeing something like that. There's all kinds of ways you could look at it. My choice, if I were any of these teams, would be to call Greg Sankey and say, you know what, we're not playing in the SEC tournament because the NCAA Tournament Committee has made it very clear that they don't care what we do in it. So why are we playing? If I'm Todd Golden right now, I'm saying, hey, we just lost our starting center in a tournament that had zero meaning for our team, seating wise. It didn't do anything for us because Florida would not have been a 7 if it would have. Obviously, I'm half joking here, but I think the SEC, maybe more than anybody, has realized this more over the past 3 or 4 years now, to where, and I think they've got to figure that out because, whether it's like, hey, let's figure out a way to move this thing back to where our championship's not played on Sunday. I don't think that's ever going to happen. I think the TV, all this with ESPN, they want the game in that prime spot on Sunday, hours before the selection show, all this other stuff. But honestly, guys, like, it's to the point now where I don't know. I mean, it's great to have a tournament championship, but I just don't know how much teams are getting out of this anymore. And it's never going to change because the money and all that, we all get it. But man, it's a tough thought, I think, for teams moving forward about this SEC tournament because, Cal's always kind of been the leader in the clubhouse on this. He's just always kind of downplayed it and downplayed it and downplayed it. But the guy's not completely wrong, I think, in terms of what it means and the value and all that. So maybe that plays into your question where it's like, maybe we do get that scenario where it's like the 5-for-5 team has nothing to lose, and you've got teams ahead of them that are like, I don't want my starting center to get hurt, so possible.
I had one more question, but then you mentioned TV and that jogged my mind of another question. So I'll start with that one first. I really like the Tuesday, Wednesday slate that the SEC's gone with. There, I guess a couple years ago, there was also Thursday games. I just don't think it put some teams at a disadvantage at points where you had to play Thursday, Saturday, Tuesday. Do you think that the SEC, with their agreement with the ESPN, will be able to keep those Tuesday, Wednesday games, or will be forced to have to add Thursday games to have more games across their networks throughout the week?
I completely worry about that. We talked about some, I don't remember the conversation I had this with somebody probably like 4 weeks ago. And that's the thought I had. I was like, if they add this Thursday slot back in, I'm like, ooh. I'm a big SEC basketball guy. You guys know this, but I'm like, I just feel like the scheduling and all that is just going to be very wonky. And and that's the thing, right? Like you said, it was so interesting having those Thursday games because there would be certain weeks where you're like, oh man, that team's got a Thursday game, then they got to go play the early game on Saturday. And then there'd be another team who did not, and they're playing the late game on Saturday. And so it's just like there are different little quirks like that, I think, with the scheduling that makes it tough. But we all know it's money, it's filling those TV slots, and I just think that's probably going to happen. I hope it doesn't because I thought it was great this year because I don't know that the schedule has ever been better than it was this year because you had the situation now where you play the ACC SEC challenge earlier in the year, and you have now that spot in SEC play where a team gets the week off, right? And I loved it. And coaches loved it. I can tell you multiple coaches talk to us like, it's never been better. Like, this is tremendous to have this week off, have this breather. And, you guys, we had the stat at one point. I don't remember what ended up being. We just stopped keeping it. But the teams that had the midweek off, boy, were they successful. Like, they did really well this year. And I just don't think that's the worst thing in the world when a team goes through a league like this to have that little slot in there. And, of course, you can still do it even if you add, the Thursday in or whatever. But I like the Tuesday, Wednesday, Saturday. Like, I like my habits, right? I'm in my routine now. This, I think, is the best way to do it. But I mean, Charles, I just think it's probably there's a chance it happens. I think so.
Yeah, that'd be unfortunate. So we'll cross our fingers for Tuesday, Wednesday games. Yeah, we already got the SEC network. I know they have SEC Plus. Let's just get SEC Network 2. They did ESPN and ESPN2. Let's just go ahead and get an SEC2 out. Last question, and I know you kind of broke down each SEC team a little bit as it relates to the NCAA tournament. A lot of SEC teams could have the opportunity to play a number 1 seed. Which SEC team, should they face a number 1 seed, do you like the best to pull it off? Auburn, Connecticut, State or Alabama against North Carolina, A&M, Florida, Kentucky against potentially Houston, or South Carolina or Tennessee against Purdue?
Don't say it.
So
Don't say it.
Who do you think I'm going to say?
He's going to say Auburn. I know it.
No. Now listen, I will make a point real quickly on that. If you're asking me, and I realize the response is probably not going to be overwhelmingly great on an Alabama podcast for people listening who are Alabama fans, but if you ask me, the SEC team from top to bottom that has the best chance to at least compete with UConn, to me, you're looking for a team that has balance and depth, and look, Auburn has that. So I think maybe they match up better with UConn than most SEC teams. So I will say that, but I don't think that's the one I would pick. I mean, to be honest, if we're looking at it too from a seeding perspective, I don't think Alabama. I mean, we said it earlier, right? And I'll go back to it. Like, I think Alabama, North Carolina is the kind of game that Alabama would want. Like, I feel like that's the kind of team that if you're going to draw one of these one seeds, give me North Carolina versus. And I'm not just saying that because they're the number 4 one. I think it's matchup based. Houston's just a team where I know for some reason people just like, okay, they get blown out by Iowa State. All of a sudden, people are just like, let's find a way to get Houston out early. Great and all, but to me, they may have the best coach in college basketball. And I also know that the way they play, they just win, right? How many times have we done this with Houston where people like count them out, and they just keep advancing. And I think this is one for like, even as high as I am, and to say maybe Kentucky has the best path to the Final Four of any SEC team, I say that knowing, well, they got to go through Houston if that's going to happen, probably. Because I think there's upset potential in that 5, 12, 4, 13 in that where you got Wisconsin, James Madison, Duke, Vermont. So I'm like, Houston's path to me is not the worst. And so you feel like Kentucky's going to have to go through Houston if they're going to do it. So I'm just saying it because of you guys. And again, I know there was contrary to popular belief. I think Alabama's going to lose to Charleston. That was not my intention with pointing out some of the trends, but I feel like if listen, let's just put it this way. If Alabama's in the Sweet 16 by that point, that tells me Alabama has figured some things out, and that getting fully healthy, getting Reitzel, Griffin, all these guys, that means they've been clicking because they would have beaten a great shooting team in Charleston, probably a team like St. Mary's, which I'm not all in on the Grand Canyon over St. Mary's. I think St. Mary's a pretty good team. I think Randy Bennett's a great coach. We've seen him in these spots before, but if Alabama's there against North Carolina, I would feel really good about Alabama at that point because that means they would have proven that they handled their business against the Charleston team who could maybe exploit a couple different things, not everything Alabama does, and probably against the St. Mary's team that, as we know, runs a lot of great stuff and could challenge you defensively. So I would say it's probably Alabama against North Carolina.
Another 4 overtime game?
Oh, maybe. I'm up for it, right? It's March. I mean, we're not sleeping anyways, so give me the 4 overtime game. So
Charles, I was gonna ask a similar question what Charles had about expansion, so I'll skip that, and I just have one question. We're recording this on Monday. It was announced today that Nate Oates had his contract extension through 2030. The most interesting thing being that his buyout is now over 3 times more than Kalen DeBoer, Alabama football coach. So it's a crazy in at Alabama. So I just wanted your thoughts on Oates' contract extension, as well as what are your thoughts on bringing a new arena to Tuscaloosa?
Well, I think Christian probably knows my thoughts on that. I feel like we've been talking about this for years, and so come on, let's take care of business there. On the Oates thing, I mean, I just said, like, I was saying, hey, I think Kelvin Sampson, obviously there's a good short list you can choose from. I think he may be the best coach in the country. Of course, Hurley would have something to say about that, the way he's got UConn rolling as a machine and all this now. But can you not? I mean, how could you not put Nate Oates in there in terms of what Alabama has achieved since he's been there? Like, I think he's got to be in the conversation because to me, like, it's not always just about, okay, this is a guy throughout his career, like, look at all the numbers and all this. To me, I think sometimes we undervalue, does a guy go into a program, know exactly the type of style he needs to accomplish the things he wants to accomplish? And I think that's where it's like, sometimes let's say there's a team that's more talented than you, right? Okay, this team's more talented. This team's got better players, all this other stuff. You don't have to be better than everybody else 1 through 10. And I'm not saying Alabama can't be or hasn't been. Last year, I thought definitely scenarios where they were pretty much better than everybody 1 through 10. But if you just have a way to be different and work a style that a lot of teams just really have a hard time replicating or preparing for in practice. How can you prepare for what Alabama does in practice? Like, it's really hard to do. Like, and I've talked to a couple coaches like around the league who have said the same thing. It's like, how do we completely get our guys in practice to understand how we're going to have to defend them for 40 minutes? Because a lot of it is based on, okay, this guard's going to have this read and we know what they're going to shoot. Like, we know they don't want to take certain shots, but we still can't figure out how we can stop them. Like, Nate Oates has spelled out exactly what they want to do. And yet, how many teams can stop him? Like, over the years, there's just not many people. And so I think you have to put him among that group of like guys who he has to be considered one of the better coaches out there. How could he not, given what they've achieved over the past several years? And so, look, we all know the Michigan job came open, all this other stuff. We've all heard that. That's the thing, right? We talk about the strength of the SEC. Why are all these SEC coaches getting these extensions? Because people realize that the coaching roster in this league is just ridiculous. And when you see a big time job or a traditional job that, feels like it's big time, there's always going to be SEC coaches mentioned in it now because of the strength of the roster that the league is built coaching wise. And I mean, how could you not put Nate Oates right up there with it or in the top with everybody else that maybe some people would put in that same range? So
it's just so interesting because I think, what was it, 2 or 3 years ago, you and I were talking about how so many SEC coaching jobs were going to be open. And now you're looking at it this season, and I think 4 SEC coaches got extensions this season. Yep. Golden, Paris, Beard, and then Oates all got extensions this season. And I mean, unless something happens with like Eric Musselman leaving, obviously Jerry Stackhouse is out at Vanderbilt. There's not going to be very much coaching turnover as far as the SEC is concerned, which might be the first time in I don't even know how many years that you might only have 1 or 2 jobs open up. It's just interesting to see kind of the development from everyone was trying to keep up with the Bruce Pearls, the John Calipari of the world, and now it's everyone's trying to keep their coach instead of trying to turn it over.
Yeah, because I mean, it's like usually we go into there was definitely a streak there where it's like we go into the offseason trying to, all right, who are the 4 coaches that are on the hot seat? Because it seemed like for a while there's always like 3 or 4. Now it's like, man, we go into next season, 1. I mean, maybe 2. I mean, Matt McMahon, LSU, if they don't make the tournament, maybe I don't know. But I mean, they had a nice turnaround this year, I thought, going from 2 wins to 9 wins in the SEC. Obviously, Gates is going to be on that list because anytime you go over, as I always say, that there's the possibility. So they're going to have to improve significantly. But like, you think about the pressure that puts on the teams that do make coaching changes now, where it's like Vanderbilt, you make a coaching change, you move on to Jerry Stackhouse. We all understood why it had to happen, but it's like we just said, Texas and Oklahoma coming in. If you don't get this right, you are looking at a situation where it's like you are stuck for multiple years, no way to get out. And, that's where the stakes have never been higher in terms of being able to make sure you get it right. And that's why we're seeing all these extensions, because I think schools know that. You let a guy get away who's having success at your school, all right, how quickly you could go from number 1 to number 16. How quickly you could go from the top 4 to the bottom 4. And we've seen that. Like, that's just the way it works now. And so you're going to see these ADs be way more aggressive than they ever have been before, because in an era like this where transfer portal, NIL, everything comes into play, it's hard to just take a huge gamble. Like, you got to make sure whatever you're getting is going to work because, again, like we said, the strength of the league is really, really good right now. And so good for teams like Alabama, Ole Miss, and so forth, like locking up their guys. Because I just think if you leave anything to chance, there's too many things that can happen in this era. So.
All right, Blake, I think that's all we got for you. Let people know what you're working on, where they can find you, just different things like that.
Yeah, appreciate it, guys. Always enjoy the conversation. And don't worry, I'm not working on any more Charleston positive stats. I'll find all the negative stats for Charleston. I'll put those out on Tuesday just to kind of even it out. But we're obviously have all of our previews and predictions for every SEC game. We've done it all year we'll have all of them for all 8 first-round games up at our YouTube channel, Southeastern 14. You can find us there. Any podcast app you use, you can listen to that. So, yeah, we'll be covering all week. Lots of live streams as usual, and should be fun. I mean, look, this is the time of year where it's like, it's so funny, guys, because during the season, we're picking SEC games. You're picking SEC on SEC. You got to pick somebody to win, right? And so when you don't pick the other team, you're called a fan of a certain team that you just picked. Now it's like, hey, I'm a fan of 8 teams because, business is good if all SEC teams are winning. So, although, hold on, I'm a fan of all teams except Auburn. Isn't that what I'm supposed to say? So
No, you're a fan of all teams except Alabama. That's
that's right. So
yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
I got to root against somebody. So
Where can we catch Burning with Blake on
Yeah.
YouTube?
oh boy, don't worry, I'll go get the Twitter Spaces back. I'll do that specifically because those were never just a complete train wreck or anything. So yeah, we will not see that coming anytime soon. So no
Twitter
worries,
Spaces are
Alabama.
great. Let's do it. Let's bring them back in the off season. Let's do some
Oh.
off season spaces.
Yeah, well, to be determined on that. So.
But yeah, you guys be sure to go follow Blake. He does great work, and it's not just basketball. Southeastern 14 also does baseball and also does football coverage. So if you're looking to find a niche or local, I don't know, I don't really know how you classify Southeastern 14. It's not national, but it's Southeastern.
Or something.
Yeah, it's something. But if you're looking to go find that type of coverage, then definitely go follow Blake. Go follow their Twitter account and all of their content. Also, you can comment on their YouTube channel and while they're doing live shows to try to mess them up. That's what I like to do. So
of course, yeah. And you can be an instigator anytime you want. So.
Yeah. But yeah, we appreciate you, Blake, and we'll definitely have you back on soon.
Appreciate it, guys. Always enjoy it.
Thank you.